Hey Coder, so in this video what we're going to do is go and update the navigation to work based on whether our user is logged in or not. Meaning we need to update the context, the state context of our application so that that is logged in state or not logged in state is passed to any component where we might want to access it. In this case, our navigation bar. And so what we're going to need to do that is a couple things. We're going to need to update our navigation bar, of course, and I'll show you what we do there. We're going to need to create some context in the root to pass into that navigation. And also what we're going to need to do is update something in staging as well. And here's the reason, because we have a problem. If you think about it, our user goes here and they click login. Then when they click login, that goes and takes them to an email, right? Or it says they need to click on their email. In this case, they go and click on their email and it opens a new browser tab, essentially. And so what we need to make sure happens is that when that takes place, there's still a way to force checking and ensuring that that state context is updated, because it won't trigger always the event listener, which is happening on this tab right now. Right, so what we need to make sure of is that we're aware that users will do all sorts of funny things. They will copy and paste links, depending on how they want to use your app, etc. And we need to be ready in all situations to handle the authentication. You know, did they land on staging? If so, let's make sure the context is updated regardless. Or did they, go back and click on something, or we need the event listener to pick up that they logged out or logged in, whatever it is, we need to be able to handle it. So we're going to, on the staging tab as well, also put similar code to what we do on the auth listener to make sure that it catches on the client side that they are in fact logged in. And then on the server side, that's not for this video, but coming up, we'll make sure that those cookies are also stored on the server side as well. So within this, call it like this trifecta, I should call it more like a trilemma. But we want to make sure that this user is or isn't authenticated and there's no funny business. It works the way they would expect. So let's go over here to VS Code now and head over to your root directory. So I'm actually going to go down here to root. And what we're going to actually start with is I'm going to start with this auth context as follows here. And so to do that, what I want to do is head over to my root and I'm going to go use store and import that. I also want to import something called useContext provider. And I also want to pass in something called create context, right? So those are three imports I want to do now. And then down here, I'm going to create context. So I'm going to go export const user session context. And I like to call my context so that I know it's the context. And here we're going to create context as follows. And in speech marks here, I'm going to say user-session. Now I could put anything in here. I could call this context pink elephants if I wanted to. It really doesn't matter. And then what I'm going to do over here is get rid of all this text here, this text blurb, and I'm going to create my state. So I'm going to say const user session is going to be equal to use store, open and close parentheses, open and close curly braces, and here we'll give it a user ID. So we'll create an object with user ID as follows, as a string, and is logged in will be equal to false. And the other thing I'm going to actually do over here is I'm going to create an interface as well. So I'm going to say export type maybe actually, and here we'll call it user ses will be equal to something like user ID, which will be a string as follows, and is logged in will be a Boolean. And the reason I want that is because I'm going to need it when I use this user session later on anywhere in my app. I don't want to get all sorts of TypeScript errors coming up. So I'm actually going to give this a type, and there's my type over there. Brilliant. Now what I want to do is actually go and pass this state via this context to any children in my app, because right now I'm in the root. And the way to do that in Qwik is you just scroll down here where it says return, and just above return, this is where we're going to go and pass our context. So here I want to say use context provider, open and close parentheses. And here I'm going to pass my user session context with the state of user session as we just created above. So here, let's just put a comment here and say pass state to children via context. Brilliant. Now, what do we want to happen if the user is signed in? Well, if they're signed in, I want to send cookies to the server, or if they signed out, I want to sign out the user both on the server or not. The server stuff we're not going to do yet because we haven't set up our server. But here, let's just go and say store or set auth state front end, right? And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to say user session dot user ID is going to be equal to session dot user, and again, I'm using the question marks in case that isn't there for whatever reason, dot ID. And here it's saying, well, I don't know what session is. Now, if you coded along in previous sessions, you already have session up here. I commented it out to make sure the build worked because I wasn't using session yet. So now I just need to pop that back into the return statement because in our event listener, we want our event and our session being passed in. So here I'm passing my session in. Brilliant. The other thing I want to do is say here user session dot is logged in. Now this is going to be equal to true now because we know that if this is signed in on the event listener, that user should be flagged as being signed in. Now let's go and copy this and do the same down here. We're not signing the user out yet, but here we are going to again change our context. So set auth state. Instead of front end, let's just call this context because that actually makes more sense, I think. Context there as well. And the user session ID is then going to be blank and the user is logged in is going to be false. I'm going to force that to show the nav bar to say they need to log in again. Now, that's not going to make any change to the nav bar, by the way, because all we've done right now is we've created our state for whether or not that user is signed in. So what we now need to do on the nav bar side is make sure that we actually catch whether they signed in or not. But not yet because of the issue I mentioned earlier, right? When we log in, we then get passed to staging before we're getting passed or before we might go back to, the home page or whatever page we're going to. So what I'm going to do is actually go and update the staging first. So let's go over here back to our VS Code, and under our routes, I'm going to go down to login, staging, and then to the index underneath staging. Not index underneath login, but index underneath staging. Right now, I want to remove this auto forward to the members dashboard because I want to control that manually just for debugging. I don't really want to keep printing out the user session data if they're logged in because we know that's working from previous sessions. So what I want to do is bring in our context. And so what I'm going to pass here is use context. And I also want to import user session context from our root directory that we created earlier. So here I'm going to go const, and we'll call this user session again, just like we did before. But now it's going to be equal to use context because we can go and grab that state from wherever it is, right? From the root of our application. And then here we just pass in user session context as follows. And then here what I want to do is do the same thing we did in our root. I'm just duplicating everything. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to make sure that that user session.id is updated. Great. Now let's close this gap over here. And this should not be session.userid. Right now we're passing this through as data. And here you'll see this does not exist on type object. So here under user session, I need to import that type we had here in root as well. So here, let's just go and import user ses like so. And here make this equal to that type. Hopefully that removes the issue there. Right, so here it's saying we basically have an object missing for that. So you know what I'm going to do here actually? I'm just going to change this to any. And here I'm just going to remove this. I'm just going to get rid of that. And here we'll just put this as an any type essentially. So let's just get rid of that type that we created earlier and we'll just leave it as is. So great, that will go and grab from the data the user ID and the logged in will be set to true. But let's say that for some reason they weren't logged in. then what we're going to do is just reset this just like we did in our root. So is logged in will be equal to false. So great. So when they go and hit, and here I'm going to remove that space, when they go and hit the staging is also just like the event listener here. The staging is also going to check to see, is that user actually logged in? Is there a session? And if there's not, in either case, that context will be set to they're not logged in. So if that event listener doesn't actually go and run, it's going to go and force check that, which is great. Now let's go back over to our code over here and now go to our components, our site, our navigation, and our navigation here. And the way I've got this working right now is where it says is session, this is just manual. If I change this to true and go npm run dev, just to go back into our application over here, and I show this to you here, you'll see it says log out in dashboard. So if I click on dashboard, it'll take me there. If I click on dashboard down here, it also takes me there. But here I can log out as well. It doesn't do anything. We haven't created the function for it yet. Now, how have I got it doing that? Well, if it is session, then what it's doing is showing you the logout and the dashboard, right? This is what I've created here in the UI. Again, this is all from GitHub, so this code's already sort of pre-built here for you. If there's not is session, it's saying go to login and sign up, right? So that's all that's happening here. But I want this to update automatically, right? I want this to update so that when it's false, like it is now, and I click login and I log in, it then updates to say, well, not false, it's true, and therefore it shows me that we've logged in. So let's go and actually update that now. So what I'm going to do is go back to VS Code. I'm in my navigation over here. And instead of is session just being false, which I'll leave it at for now, I'm going to actually go and let's use a use client effect again. And let's put in down here, use client effect. And let's make that a function as follows. Now this is important. I also want to track the session. So here I'm going to put track, and I'm going to track not our is session, but our context. Because remember, we actually need to pass our context into our navigation. Basically, everything we did for staging, we're pretty much doing here in navigation with the context. So let's go over here to our staging and copy that code we had there, right? So we want to import user session here as we did before. And I also want to go back here, and what else do I want to import? Use context, right? So let's import use context as well. And I want to import this or create this user session. So I'm going to do the same stuff I did before, right? So here's our user session. And so what we're going to track here is we're going to track our user session here. So at any time that changes, we're going to track it. And we're going to say something along the lines of, for now, just console.log, and let's just console.log user session. And we'll literally just print out as follows, our user session like such. That's literally all we're going to do right now. So let's go back over to our application. Let's go and show the developer tools and our console. And right now it's just saying user session proxy. So if I go over here and I'd go user session, I don't know, .value, and print that, it says user session undefined, right? So it's saying there's no user session. Let me refresh the app, user session undefined. So let me remove that. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So what you have to do is just put in the user session, but make sure, because we've done so many updates, you refresh the browser, right? You create that root again. It just all refreshes. And here we are. We have user ID and is logged in false, which is true. We are not logged in. So what I want to do now is go to login. And now I'm going to put in my email address and click login. And there you go. I go over to my email. Here's my login. I'm going to click login. That opens up this staging tab. Now it's not redirecting us because I don't want it to right now. I want to control everything. Here's our console, right? We're not seeing anything. If I go back here, and do you see now, this is interesting what happened. When I clicked on the initial tab I used, look here, our event listener ran, right? It actually went and run. It says signed in. You can see that that's gone and run. Nothing really happened here, although it is showing it now because I've gone and clicked on the previous tab. But had I not clicked here, you would not have seen this signed in. You see, every time I click on this tab, It's refreshing because it's the same domain. Now check this out. If I go here to application and I open up session storage, etc., I don't see anything other than this local storage here, which is correct because I'm on a separate tab. But if I go here to this one and I go to application, I can see all my cookies here. So bear this in mind. It's really, really tricky. Authentication feels really tricky because you've got to manage the dynamics of the browser, whether something's on the client or not, whether it's on this tab or not. And it can get really confusing. I've lost hours of my life, weeks of my life on authentication. But pay attention to what I'm showing you here, right? Let's go back to console on both tabs. Your users are going to be all over the place with where they're clicking and where they're going. So here it's saying signed in. That auth listen is run, but only because I clicked here. Now, what I haven't seen print out over here yet is what we've told it to print out, which is whether or not there's a user session. Now, why hasn't it done that? Because I'm not on the nav bar. We've not had to load the navigation bar. So let's click on dashboard. There's still no navigation bar on dashboard. So let's just go to home page where we know the navigation bar is. And here's our user session. Is logged in is true. Very interesting. If I refresh that, it now says is logged in is false because I refreshed the browser. So if you were to, for example, go and copy this link and go copy link address and paste it into the browser as follows, and then go, or try to, it's an old link, so it's not going to work. But my point is, when you're debugging this as a developer, when you are debugging your authentication, you're going to run into problems. And it's going to look like it's not working, but it actually is. And so you need to be aware of what tab are you on. Therefore, should you see your HTTP only cookies, etc. on that tab? Is there a local session there, etc., etc.? And then what is triggering the event? So where's your printout happening? Is the component showing or not? But what we've been able to demonstrate, and actually let's go and log in again. So we'll go and do this again. Let's just delete that. Oh, I think I've just deleted the email here. Let me go back and wait for myself to be able to log in again. No, I'll have to wait a bit, so I'll just pause the video. All right, there we go, back in business. So let's wait for our email. There it is. And let's click on login. So watch what happens. Again, let's just bring up our developer tools. And here we're in console. Let's go to the dashboard, back to the home page. But we are logged in. In terms of the state of the app here, we're logged in. If I were to refresh the browser, which I'm not going to do right now because I've just shown that to you, it's going to lose that. Because when you refresh the application, it's not maintaining the state. And the way we're going to fix that is we're going to make sure that our cookies are also sent server-side as well, right? So they're stored server-side as HTTP only cookies. So when we refresh the browser, it's going to persist that state as well. But now our navigation bar hasn't updated, right? To say log out and also dashboard. So let's go and fix that right now. So here we'll say, if user session, so we'll say something along the lines of, here we've got our user session. So we'll say if user session, and that will be dot is logged in. So is logged in is true, which if it is, we don't need to put equals true. We'll say here something like is session dot value is equal to true as follows. Else we can just say is equal to false. Now I could have just made the session value equal to this user session, or just not even had this use signal at all. But actually, I'm going to keep the use signal in because that way it's very clear that that is what's controlling this down here. I like to just keep that separate. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I'll keep this console login. Actually, no, I won't. We know it's working, so I'll remove that. And let's go over here, and I'm going to refresh my browser. Let's go here as well. And let's go and log in again. So here I'm going to click on this, log in, go here to my magic link. So here I've got another email that's come through, and it should be this one up here. Let's go and view my develop. Oh, that must have been the old email. That's okay. Let's click on this one. Let's go to view developer tools, dashboard, homepage. And there you go. you can see it's now showing our logout and dashboard automatically. That all happened automatically. Excellent. So one thing I also want to do is handle the logout here. So what I'm going to do here is take our function here, handle logout. I actually want to write it above. I just like writing functions on top of these other sort of functions here, my own custom ones. And so this handle logout is going to be run whenever someone clicks on this. And so what I'm going to do is we'll bring in Supabase. So let's import Supabase from our utils. And we're going to say something like Supabase or await Supabase.auth and then here sign out, open and close parentheses as follows. And this needs to be an async function because we're using await over here. So this will be logout user. And just in case they're not at home, let's also import navigation. So from Qwik City, let's import use navigate. And so here what we'll do is we'll say const nav is equal to use navigate. And then we'll say nav.path is equal to the home page as follows. So we'll just make sure that no matter where they've signed out, they're redirected there to the home page. So let's just put out here, handle logout as follows. And then here I'll get rid of that. And then what I want to do actually, before we go and redirect them. So let's put in here, handle client side. We also want to log them out on the server, although we haven't created that server side code yet. So handle server side logout as follows. So this will be where we go and help them. I'll just put some exclamation marks here, and I'll do the same in the root actually, because we've got some server stuff here as well, just to remind us that we need to go and update that code. So if they've gone and logged out, that will also sign them out from the server. But now let's see what happens if I go over here. Oh, it looks like it's already updated that. So let's close all of these windows down. Let's go back to login. Let's log in again. And there we go. Success, please sign in. And then let's go here and click on this login here. Right, redirecting to dashboard. Again, I've got this manually working. I'll change that in a moment. Let's go back to the home page. All right, great. Now what happens if I click log out? There you go. It's logged me out. Now it's ended that session. So how did it know to do that? Well, if I go here to developer tools, let's see here it says signed out. It's our event listener, remember? So on our root, I love it when authentication works. I get very excited. I'm very geeky like that, I guess. When I go to our root here, you can see within our event listener, we've got this signed out. So it's listening for that event, and then it's changing that user session state, which is passed over to our navigation, right? So that means that basically we can get rid of these crosses here, and we can say, great, that there's taken care of, and that there is taken care of as well. So that's working. And also we made some changes to staging. I should have had that as a partial earlier, but that's now working too. So congratulations if you've got this far, because this can be a real headache. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on, both with the browser, with it being the client side or server side, etc., depending on what tab you're on, what's going on. And it can be a real headache like that. Nonetheless, let's get rid of this tab. We're back here again. We can go back to our home page here, and that should set us up nicely for the next session, where what we're going to do now in the next session very quickly is I'm going to show you how to handle your OAuth providers, i.e. if you want people to sign up via GitHub or Google or whatever, I'm going to show you how to do that, and we're going to go and do it with GitHub. Remember, if you're feeling overwhelmed with all of this and you want to take a break and you've had enough, remember to just shut up and code.